This lovely Saturday. I know it has been a crazy time these past few weeks of just change, school, everything's a little crazy right now. So we do appreciate you making time for yourselves and to come be in community with all of us. We're going to start this workshop today by doing some introductions. I'm going to have everyone on our team do an introduction, and if anyone who is attending wants to introduce themselves as well, we would love to know what brings you here today. So what are you interested in this workshop? Why did you choose to come and learn about wellness with us today? So I can start. My name is Maya. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a fourth year. And I'm here today because I am a person who has always practiced some sort of self-care, some sort of wellness. And I'm also a history major. And so the two things kind of have blended together for this workshop. And I'm excited to learn and teach and discuss with all of you. Erica, would you go next?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us. My name is Erica. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fourth year film and digital media intensive psychology double major. I'm affiliated with College 9, best college. And I am also a APERC, which is the Asian American Pacific Islander Resource Center, one of the lead interns there. And in my free time, back in high school, when I had free time, I would engage in a lot of acupuncture practices. So that is a lot of where my history comes from. And yeah, that's pretty much it about me that I think I'm supposed to share. Okay, cool. I will pass it over to Edward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edward. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm also one of the lead interns at APERC. What brings me here today is I just want to be in community with all of you and sort of just talk about some of the topics we're going to discuss today. Um, it has definitely played like some part of my life. So I just wanted to come here and talk about that with you all. And whoever wants to go next, John, would you like to go next?
I can go next. Hey everybody, it's really good to be here this morning with everybody. I'm John. I'm a graduate student from the politics department, and I'm also the APER graduate student intern this quarter. So really excited to become part of all of your guys' programming. Also here to just engage in conversation around this topic. I think wellness, health and wellness are things like a lot of us are thinking about at this moment, especially with, increased racism and racial violence in our community. So, definitely a conversation. A lot of these questions are on my mind, and just want to echo what Edward said too about being in community with you guys all. Thank you guys for this conversation, and I really look forward to the discussion. I'll pass it back to Maya.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Is there anyone joining us today who wants to share why they decided to come out today? It's totally all right if no one is interested in sharing, but I want to hear from y'all. So you can just unmute.
I'll say something. I think it's important to have a really open mind when thinking about wellness and thinking about who taught you what wellness is. And I think we're all learning and growing as people. So it's good to think about the different ways in which like people can grow and do wellness. That's not always like what society or like mainstream Western society tells you what wellness is.
Yeah, that's great. I think that a lot of us, especially now, have been thinking about wellness and how it's changed over this past year, over the past few weeks. Everything looks different for every person now than it did a year ago. So wellness has to change, self-care has to change as well. So today we're going to be talking specifically about 3 kinds of wellness practices. We're going to be first kind of hearing from all of you about what you know about these practices. They are yoga, Ayurveda, and traditional Chinese medicine. So to get the ball rolling, I'm going to send a link to a Jamboard. This is a collaborative whiteboard. If you click on the link, you can just add your thoughts to the discussion. It's anonymous, so you don't have to worry about someone judging what you're putting down. This is a space for us all to just share and completely non-judgmental. So click that link and I'll give y'all like 3 minutes, 2 minutes to just brain dump what you know, if you know anything about these topics. And it's totally okay if you don't, because we are here to learn together. And if you have any trouble with the link, just let me know. So while they're popping up, I will share. Seems like we're starting with yoga, which for a lot of us is probably the most familiar of these on the surface level. Yoga is a word that comes up all the time. So we have some stickies here that have defined it maybe as a form of meditation and physical exercise. It's a physical practice that centers the mind by encouraging intentional breath. Yeah, all of those are really important. Intentional can help with being present. So it's this combination of meditation and physical exercise, intentional movement. Someone says it's calming. I definitely agree with that. Sometimes it's calming, sometimes it can really pump you up. It just depends. About Ayurveda, someone has said it can be foods that we eat, the space that we're in, and the energies we exist in. That's really interesting. Very different from yoga. Balance is another word that someone's put down. They call yoga and Ayurveda sister sciences. So it might be interesting while we're talking today to think about how those two might complement each other, might go together. Traditional Chinese medicine, we have many years of tradition. It has roots in many, many plants. Yeah, dietary traditions, it looks like maybe is being shared. That's something that those two have in common. For Ayurveda, we have Kapha, Vata, and Pitta. So someone has a background in the actual practices of Ayurveda. Something else for yoga, helpful for both physical and emotional well-being. I definitely agree with that. That's great. Thank you all for sharing. So unless anyone wants to share out about one of the things that they wrote down, this space is open for that. If you do want to share something, I'll give it a second. And if not, that's okay. I am going to bring us into a little bit of a history lesson now. We're going to talk about the origins of these 3 practices. I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if you can see that. All good? Yes, awesome. Okay. So we're going to start with traditional Chinese medicine. The origins of Chinese medicine emerged in the shamanistic era of the Shang dynasty period, which is between 1766 and 1122 BCE. During this time, the religious deity was called Shang Di, and they were believed to live in heaven in an imperial court, accompanied by dead ancestors. Shang Di believed that illnesses were caused by either upsetting an ancestor and consequently being cursed, or that a demon or evil had entered the body and caused an illness. Shamans would act as mediators between the people, the ancestors, and Shangdi, a technique called scapulomancy, which involved writing on oracle bones, which were usually scapular bones or tortoise shells, were then heated and pierced with rods until cracks formed in the shell or bone. The cracks would be interpreted by the shaman to answer the question at hand. The answer interpreted by the shaman was said to reveal the will of the ancestors. Traditional Chinese medicine theory emerged at a time after this, when philosophy and science began to overlap, around the time of the Warring States in the Zhou dynasty period, which is from 475 to 221 BCE. This period would mark the beginning of intellectual reform and is referred to as Zhuzhi Baijia, which is in English, various teachers, 100 schools. Following the downfall of the Qin dynasty, Han scholars attempted to collect and organize the medical texts from the Warring States period. Scholars examined and collated numerous texts to put together a coherent Chinese medical philosophy. Many of the foundations of current day practices are rooted in these texts, most notably the Huangdi Neijing, which is the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic. It has served as the guiding principal text for Chinese medicine throughout time, and it still does today. The Huangdi Neijing consists of conversations between the Yellow Emperor and his physician, outlining core concepts and medical knowledge of Chinese medicine, including acupuncture and moxibustion, as the main tools for correcting imbalances and treating illness. Although the Huangdi Neijing is seen to be the foundation of acupuncture, the origins of acupuncture have been observed by archaeologists dating as far back to 6000 BCE. Broadly, the Huangdi Neijing, along with other ancient Chinese medical texts, explained the concept of disease and that good health was closely linked to the movement of qi and blood. Illness was attributed to stagnation, deficiency, excess, or improper movement of qi or blood, causing imbalances of yin and yang. These concepts were used to help explain physiology and disease in a time well before we could actually observe physiological processes through microscopes or lab testing. And it went on to form the theoretical framework of traditional Chinese medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture gradually developed over the next few centuries, becoming a standard medical therapy in China, along with massage, diet, herbal medicine, bleeding, and moxibustion. In 17th century China, there was a decline in interest in traditional practices, and ancient medicines were thought to be riddled with superstition. With the rise of Western medicine in the 20th century, acupuncture fell further out of favor and was eventually outlawed in China in 1929. In 1949, the new government revived acupuncture and other traditional medicines, and in the 1950s, research facilities started to open in China. Acupuncture continued to grow and started to gain popularity in other neighboring countries. In the 1970s, a New York Times journalist was treated with Chinese medicine after having an emergency surgery while in China. He was so impressed with his treatment and recovery that he wrote an article about his experience, which brought much popularity and speculation about acupuncture to the West. And now we're going to talk about the origins of Ayurveda and yoga, which, like we talked about before, are considered sister sciences. The origins of Ayurveda and yoga stretch deep into antiquity. From 3300 to 1300 BCE, a Bronze Age civilization flourished in the Indus Valley in today's Pakistan. Many of the foods and spices that we associate with Ayurvedic cuisine, including rice, mung beans, urud dal, ginger, and turmeric, were already being cultivated in this ancient period. Later, the center of civilization shifted to the Ganges Basin, where a people who called themselves the Arya, or noble ones, practiced a positive and life-affirming spirituality, which was encapsulated in the Vedas. The Vedas were a collection of texts containing songs, mantras, and rituals to be used by Brahmins, who were the Vedic priests. They were composed between 500 and 1000 BCE in an ancient form of Sanskrit. The Vedas celebrate the elements of life, especially fire, wind, and water, as well as Mother Earth and the plants and the animals who dwell on her. The word yoga was also first mentioned in the Rig Veda. Yoga was slowly refined and developed by the Brahmins and the Rishis, who were mystic seers. They documented their practices and beliefs in the Upanishads, which were a huge work containing over 200 scriptures. The most renowned of yogic scriptures is the Bhagavad Gita, which was composed around 500 BCE. The Upanishads took the idea of ritual sacrifice from the Vedas and internalized it, teaching that the sacrifice of the ego came through self-knowledge, action, and wisdom. As the Vedic civilization entered into the Iron Age at around 600 BCE, a spirit of reason and awakening dawned across the known world, with Plato and Aristotle giving their teachings in Greece, the Hebrew prophets in the Middle East, and the Buddha in northern India. Indian methods of healing shook off age-old trappings of superstition and acquired a clarity, a depth of reasoning, and a profound philosophical basis that have characterized Ayurveda ever since. After centuries of clarification and refinement, these texts assumed their current form during India's Golden Age under the Gupta Empire from 320 to 550 CE. On the other hand, in the 4th century, yoga masters rejected the teachings of the ancient Vedas and embraced the physical body as the means to achieve enlightenment. They developed Tantra yoga with radical techniques to cleanse the body and mind to break the knots that bind us to our physical existence. This exploration of these physical, spiritual connections and body-centered practices led to the creation of what we primarily think of as yoga in the West. It's called Hatha Yoga. Here you can see the 6 branches of yoga. Appearing first as traders in the form of the East India Company and then later under direct rule by the British Crown, the British sought to impose their version of civilization upon India in the 19th century. From the founding of the Indian Medical Service in 1763, Western medicine was seen as normative. There were certain positive developments under the time of British rule. British botanists worked to compile the knowledge of Indian medicinal plants, both through scholarly books and through the establishment of botanical gardens. They were unwittingly continuing an effort that had begun in Vedic times. But the long arm of the empire was ill-suited to separate the quacks from the authentic practitioners, especially of an ancient wisdom that was so different from their own. As a result, many of the great Ayurvedic texts, teachers, and techniques were silenced. Ayurveda survived on the outskirts of society, in rural areas where the traditional ways of living were maintained. As India regained independence, Ayurveda, along with Unani and Siddha medicinal systems, were revived and acknowledged by the newly formed government. In the mid to late 20th century, seekers from the West began to travel to India. The teachings of yoga and Ayurveda were rediscovered by a generation disenchanted with the reductionism and materialism that had come to characterize Western thought, initiating an explosion of interest that continues to this very day. The importation of yoga to the West continued at a trickle until Indra Devi, who you see here, opened her yoga studio in Hollywood in 1947. Since then, many more Western and Indian teachers have become pioneers, popularizing Hatha Yoga and gaining millions of followers. Hatha Yoga has now many different schools or styles, which all emphasize the many different aspects of this practice. By the early 1980s, Dr. Vasant Lad, Dr. Robert Svoboda, and David Frawley were spreading the teachings of Ayurveda throughout the United States. The publication of this book, Perfect Health, The Complete Mind-Body Guide by Deepak Chopra, served to popularize Ayurveda among the general public. So I know that was a lot of information. We covered thousands of years all in 10 minutes. And now I'm gonna give us all a chance to talk about it. So is there anything that stood out to you as something new, something you didn't know, or something that's surprising. Maybe you did know, but hearing it again made you go, oh, that is something that I wish I had thought about more. I wish I had remembered. And you can put it in the chat, or you can just unmute. Leaving space for the chat people. There we go. There's such a deep history, and I often forget about it because of our Western practices today. Yeah. So why do we think that maybe the history isn't taught along with the practices themselves? Like, have you ever walked into a yoga studio and they told you maybe why the yogi became a yogi, or where they were trained, or how they are connected to the history? Why might that not be the first thing that happens when we go to yoga studios these days, or go to get acupuncture done, or whatever it might be? And again, anyone can share.
Yeah, I think it's because it's turned into like a for-profit industry, and like that's self-care in general as well. Like it's become very capitalistic, and it's important to know the history though, to then hone that in when you're practicing yoga or you're practicing Ayurveda or anything really. But I think it's been purposefully erased in a way when it's been brought here. Like how you said I forget her name, but the Idra person who brought it here and Americanized it, it's just like, that doesn't feel like it's authentic anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So I put her name in the chat in case you want to look into her a little bit more. But she is a white woman who took on an Indian name, and she popularized the practices for, obviously other white women in Hollywood who were looking to stay fit rather than to have that spiritual, physical practice. Can we think of other ways that capitalism has changed these practices?
I think a lot of it is it became a commodity for Americans and other European countries. I think that's a huge issue in taking as a practice that's rooted in thousands of years of tradition and history and meaning, and there's a lot of spiritual and traditional connection behind it, and then taking that and commoditizing
Commodifying it, yeah.
commodifying exactly, yeah, commodifying it and making it catchy and trendy, and then you hop on and you see, oh, there's like all these different trends, and the first one that I saw was like goat yoga, and that's when I was just like, okay, so we've definitely taken appropriation to a whole new level. And so they take these things that are considered foreign to Americans and to European countries, and they take things from Asia, and a lot of this has to do with colonization and being in Asian countries in the first place, and then taking that back and saying, look, this is stuff we brought from there, but we're going to make it our own. And the most recent example, doesn't have to do with wellness, but it's like mahjong. Most recent example I can think of is three white ladies from Texas taking a historical game from China, mahjong, and just completely making it their own because it wasn't pretty enough for them to sell to the masses. And so that's definitely a reflection of capitalism in this industry and how it has completely eroded the beautiful and ancient practices that we knew growing up, but it's just not the same anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people who are here. I am wondering, the YouTube link in the chat. Do you want to share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, it's a documentary I watched on Netflix about Bikram yoga, and it goes through the whole story of the guy who like really capitalized on Bikram yoga. And it's just absolutely insane to watch. So yeah, if you're in a good state and you can handle it, I recommend watching it, but it is heavy.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, more resources is always better, even though I understand it is hard to talk about some of this stuff, to think about it critically. That's why it's good to do it a lot of the time in community when you can support the people that you're talking about it with. John?
Yeah, I think another reason is just because the knowledge systems upon which these like wellness practices are founded are dismissed as like non-scientific and even like opposed to like modern science. It's like, keep up with your health, but that means going to the doctor and going to a Western doctor, not centering your life on these kinds of wellness practices, but maybe using them as a supplement to like more traditional Western medicine. I think there's just like this kind of widespread dismissal. And I can attest to this personally growing up in a household that did practice Chinese medicine, that, these are like rooted in superstition or rooted in like an ancient kind of way of knowing that's just like not viable anymore. So I was really interested, Maya, in what you were presenting about like the history of Chinese medicine and philosophy and how it became like this whole system of knowing that was rooted in like reasoning. And like we're, I think, often taught to think that, oh, there is no science that goes behind like these kinds of Eastern wellness practices, when from your presentation, it seems like there was like so much like discussion and debate and like science that went behind the development of these systems.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that as human beings, we have a tendency to dismiss things we don't understand. But the achievement of, reasoning, these people in ancient times said, well, our practices used to be superstitious, but now they're based in reason. And the fact that we can't accept that now calls into question a lot about what medicine and what, how society looks at medicine across the world. The chat is, I'm so glad y'all are talking over there. Feel free to keep using that. Is there anything else that we want to talk about on this subject? I have a really great testimony from an alumni who shared a little bit about her experiences. So we can either chat a little bit more now and then watch that, or we can just get to watching that. What do we think? Okay, I'm going to load it up. Oh, one sec. Need to do it with sound.
Hi everyone, my name is Manjari. I am a former college 10 student and a
Maya?
former CPA.
Yeah,
We don't
like
see the video.
You
don't see it?
I'm really grateful that they're letting me talk. Hi everyone.
I cannot stop it.
We saw your desktop, like the
Okay.
computer.
Let me try it one more time. Can you see her now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Manjari. I am a former college 10 student and a former CPA, like the lovely people that are hosting this event, and I'm really grateful that they're letting me talk about my experiences with some Asian wellness practices. I grew up with Ayurveda, I would say. It wasn't necessarily like a huge like lifestyle change for me. I just generally knew that I had like Ayurvedic ingredients in our diet, just as a culture we do. and that I would use specific ingredients to kind of like supplement allopathic medication that I would get like prescribed or you'd get over the counter. So I remember when I was younger, I would take like antibiotics like that amoxicillin, the pink one, along with like a glass of milk with like turmeric and honey in it to kind of boost my immunity. So it was definitely like a supplement and to kind of like help my body the best I can, along with the medication I was advised to take by my doctor. I also get like severe allergies during the spring, so along with like a Zyrtec or whatever, I can like steam myself to kind of like decongest everything. So I don't know, it's something that I still do today that I feel like is a natural way to kind of help myself and help my body recover from allergies, along with like taking over-the-counter medication. I just think that it works really well for my body. And since I've been doing it so consistently, it's just kind of become second nature to me. So I guess now it's become more of a lifestyle thing for me. And I'm really happy to see that things like this are gaining more traction and becoming more popular, like turmeric, ginger, like people are recognizing their health benefits, or like the steam that I do during allergy season, Napi pots that you use. It basically looks like a small teapot that you use to clear your sinuses. But I'm glad these things are getting more popular, they're becoming more accessible. I feel like these sort of like small changes or like small supplements can really lead to like a healthier lifestyle without breaking the bank. It makes me really happy to see like turmeric and stuff popping up in all sorts of grocery stores. And like I said, more accessible, it's more economical way for people to kind of boost their health, as like people would go to like the vitamin section and get vitamins to boost specific parts of their health. So it's really nice to see that. I just don't appreciate kind of like how some companies are appropriating these things, like Starbucks have like their golden milk things, or like turmeric lattes or whatever, or like Jamba Juice has like ginger shots. I don't know, I appreciate that they have such a reach as like brands, but I don't kind of like that they make these products and kind of act like it popped out of nowhere as if there aren't like cultures that have been using these practices for centuries to kind of benefit everyone. So I don't know, that's just something I guess to keep in mind as a consumer. That being said, I'm really happy that there's events or like resources like this for people to kind of learn about where these things come from. Like, I'm not going to deny that buying from these companies and stuff is very easy, especially considering how broad of a reach they have. I just think it's important as a consumer to kind of educate yourself on where these things come from, or like how you're supposed to kind of use them. Like I said, it's like a lifestyle thing, it's like a supplement thing, it's not necessarily like a cure-all. But I also think that if you like don't have access to a doctor or anything, it's a good way to kind of keep yourself healthy and like do the best you can to promote a healthier lifestyle. So those are just some of my thoughts about what I grew up with and what I think about like how it's going on today. And I hope it leads to some great discussion amongst all of you. So thanks, guys.
So that was our lovely alum, Manjeri. She talked about how Ayurvedic practices have been, like we were talking about earlier, taken by capitalism and spread to a larger audience, but also, you know, the origins have been erased when people are buying these things. And it also makes the practices less accessible because you're putting a paywall basically behind the drinks or the ginger shots or whatever it might be. I'm interested to hear about other kinds of, if other people have seen examples of this with yoga, again, with Ayurveda, with Chinese medicine. Feel free to share. Sometimes it's hard to come up with an example until you hear one from someone else. The turmeric latte is something that I had seen but not realized was appropriation until it was, you know, put in front of me.
I think I have something. So I feel like one of these things that may like fall under this is sort of like the yerba mate brand, I feel like. Because traditionally it's like it's used for like focus and like I can't I don't know the exact origins of it, but I know that it was like traditionally done in like a pot or like a metal pot. You okay, it's like you make tea, but now we're just selling it in like cans, and like it just seems a little weird. Like although like I do drink it, and like I sometimes I like catch myself, and but like it just feels a little like I don't know. I feel like putting something that was so traditional in like a can and just like I feel like the overall like message that they're sending with their brand right now is kind of like just so far removed from what it was intentionally used for that it's just getting to a point where it's like I don't know if I can like really sit by this and just like you know um not talk about it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
I totally hear what you're saying, Edward. It's like yerba mate, the point of it is to like get you better at studying or give you more energy for like studying or working, which is like so capitalist, right? Um, I guess another example that came to mind from your question, Maya, was the recent Mulan movie and how like Chi became like this way for Mulan to have all these supernatural powers related to like fighting and war making. When I think in the tradition, right, I think bringing balance to your body or to yourself is more related to like being in community with other people or like being compassionate for like creatures in the world, including your neighbors. So I think that's like such a good example of like traditional Chinese concepts related to wellness being twisted and kind of co-opted for even ideals like conquest and domination and fighting. If that makes sense, guys.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, both of those are things that we as, students in California and America, we drink yerba and we watch Disney movies, and you do it and you often don't reflect. But it was really great that you both presented those examples. I remember watching Mulan in my 7th grade like history class, and we talked about how she was a blend of Chinese culture and Japanese culture and like made up Disney culture. Yeah, you have to be very, very cognizant when watching media these days. I think that is a good transition to our student panel. We are going to have our 3 APRIC interns answer some questions about their own experiences with wellness, with their families. And then we can all sort of continue to talk about how we can acknowledge these origins as we, participate in the consumption of the practices or the drinks, the tools, whatever it is that you're doing. So would you all like to reintroduce yourselves and maybe share a little bit about your personal experiences with Eastern wellness, ancient wellness? Anyone can start.
Yes, sorry. I was to the conversation right before this. I was just thinking in my head, but I never it never came out. But I was thinking about dessert hummus, and I was thinking about how that is an example of cultural appropriation of something that has been in our culture in the Southwest Asian North African culture and community for thousands and thousands of years. It's an ancient, food, and it's just been commodified commodified by American like entrepreneurs. Because I was thinking about like oh my gosh, I just remember like dessert hummus coming out on like Shark Tank, and it was like a huge deal. And they're like, and I was like, it's hummus. We why why? And so yeah, I just wanted to put that out there, that is an example to me of like an extreme cultural appropriation that I've been seeing recently, of taking Eastern food products, wellness, and other facets of our culture, and just come like, adding that American touch and like making it Americanized. And it's like, okay, all right, very problematic. But anyways, that was just my thought for the previous conversation. But I'm Erica, hello, she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the lead interns for the Asian American Pacific Islander Resource Center. And that's it. What else should I say?
If you want to share about your personal experiences now, you
okay.
can feel free.
Okay. I need to read the question again. What was the question? Personal experiences. Okay.
Yeah.
Personal experiences, for me, I definitely grew up with my mom more specifically than my dad. My mom specifically has always been a proponent of my health and wellness as a child. Definitely learned and picked up a lot of different self-care practices as well as preventative measures for health from her. And my grandma as well, as, but I don't like truly like remember a lot that my grandma has taught me in terms of health and wellness. But I think some of the practices that I definitely saw them do in their lives as a child, when I was a child, I mimicked that as I grew older. And I think this like process of mimicry has kind of come to fruition for me as an adult as well. I noticed, I'm like, oh wow, that's exactly what my mom did 20 years ago when I was a kid, and had no understanding and wasn't able to explain why she did the things that she did. But now I kind of understand why. And a lot of that is just passed down through generations of just telling your children, this is what I do, this is what works for us, that kind of stuff. So one of the sweetest things that my mom does is that she always will offer me water or some other kind of herbal medicine whenever I was sick, no matter what the ailment was: cough, cold, stomach ache, headache, joint pain, muscle ache. It was there were all kinds of solutions to my illnesses that were not rooted in pharmaceuticals and narcotics. So I think a lot of it was just kind of like, okay, well, before we go to the doctor, what can we try at home that will help? And I think with the friends that I had growing up, a lot of them, I grew up in a mainly white school, and a lot of the friends that I had growing up, they were very confused, like, oh, you're sick, why don't you just go to the emergency room right now? And I was like, that's a really interesting, like, I didn't realize that at the time when I was little, like my friends, when they were sick, they would go immediately to a doctor or to their primary care physician or to an emergency room right away. And that's not something that my family practiced or my cousins practiced. We would try remedies at home. We would try to, offer water or some herbal medicine, maybe like try acupuncture, try stretching, that kind of stuff before going to see a doctor, but like straight away. And that's something that kind of has been ingrained in me as an adult, making my own health decisions without my parents being here. It's like, okay, what can I try at home before I feel like I need to go to the doctor? And that's like my last resort, it's like going to the hospital. And I'm not sure if like this applies to others that are on this panel, but a lot of it is passed on from like family advice. Like if I was sick, my mom would ask my uncle or my aunt, what should we do? and I was like, why would you ask them? And no one in my family except for one of my uncles has an MD, so I was very confused, like, why would you ask them? But I realized, they have really good advice, and it comes from generations of knowledge passed down, of what practices work for people in our family, what specifically, what cultural you know, like your biology, the cultural part of that, because there's a lot of different things that, you know, based off of your ethnicity, it's not as prevalent in America because they don't usually see those cases in, for example, white people. It's not the same. And so that has kind of been rooted in my practices and my experiences of healing, and trying to take care of myself, and more specifically work through preventative measures rather than remedy measures. So like a lot of in Chinese and Indonesian practices, it's like wanting to prevent the illness before it even happens instead of trying to take care of an illness once it happens. So yeah, that's all I will say. I'll pass it to someone else.
I can go next. So my name is Edward. I use he, him pronouns. I'm also I'm the other lead intern at APERC. A lot of what Erica said, I can also like sort of echo. It's definitely about like preventing the illness before it even happens. My mom, I don't know what it is with moms, but she fed me so much like so much stuff that I back then didn't like. I was like, this doesn't taste good. Why would I eat it? You know? And I'm still like I was also a picky eater, but that's like something different. But like um it just it just like that experience honestly it I feel like it left like a bad impression on me. Um and I didn't really understand it as a kid. And when I moved here to the US when I was very young, I like saw all these other people, all these other kids, um, like Erica said, going to the doctors every time they were sick. And I was like, what? That must be like something that people just do, right? Like that's just like that's a very normal thing. Like, oh, I'll just go to the doctor. But like my parents didn't like they're not gonna go to the doctor just because like I felt like I had a stomach ache or I had like a headache, you know? Um, they know that there's other ways to sort of address that. Um, so my like experience with like ancient wellness is like almost like I I just had a bad experience with it as a kid, and I was like, I don't like this. But in reality, like there are like so many merits to it. I know I mentioned or I put in the Jamboard earlier that there was like a lot of it's centered in like plants and stuff, and a lot of modern medicine is also centered in like a lot of plants that they just refine and like for example press into a pill, right? Like you can literally apply the same thing to like Chinese medicine and like Chinese herbs, and it would probably give you like you know like a similar effect, but we just place such a heavier emphasis on like the things that the Western cultures developed. Um, and now I'm not sure like exactly why that is. Like, why are we so ingrained with that? Like, what like moment in time? Like, how did this come about? But yeah, I'm like starting to go on a tangent. But yeah, I think that's it for now.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing, Erica and Edward. I definitely can relate to a lot of the things you guys are saying about your personal experiences. I share similar experiences. I remember when I was younger, my mom used to make me drink like these concoctions from the Chinese medicine store, and they were so bitter. Like I literally couldn't swallow it. I had to like chase it with soda. Like that was the only way I was able to get it down. So I was definitely really resistant. And at one point, I became super resistant because this one year I have really dry skin. And in the winter, once my mom made me take this bath, and I swear I found like a lizard tail in it. And after that, I was like freaked out. I was like, I don't know if this is for me. This is like totally a backwards kind of medicine, you know, all these ideas that we're socialized to kind of believe um, in the West. So growing up and becoming more aware of my cultural identity has made me more open to learning more about uh, these kind of wellness practices and knowledge traditions. So I definitely hear what you guys are saying. Um, I guess one thing I'd like to add to the conversation that we haven't really discussed that I'm kind of thinking about these days or the ways in which wellness as a set of practices or as a discourse can function effectively. I think like there's the argument that instead of like working towards change, all these discourses about wellness actually displace it. Like if we meditate more, our lives are going to get better. If we learn how to be more mindful or present in our bodies, then we can like navigate the world in a way that we couldn't before. And I think like sometimes these discourses can be like gaslighting, in that they're telling us that our problems are due to our kind of failures to be present, or um, our kind of inadequacies, when really they're like the effects of our lives in a world that we know is racist and sexist and transphobic. Um, so as much as we can like work on our bodies and our minds, I think it's important to remember that bodies are still kind of valued differently in our world and treated differently, and that some people are sick because of like, the systems of oppression that exist in the world. Um, so I think one question that I've been thinking through in preparation for this today is like, how can we take some of the stuff that's really valuable from like these wellness practices that you guys have discussed, that we've all kind of like touched on today, and use them to inform like political movement or social movements to like intervene in these like systems of oppression that make us unwell in the first place. So I know that's kind of like a different way of thinking about this, but I think it's something to consider, in our conversation about like commodification and power.
Yeah, that is a great question and a sort of daunting question. Maybe we can all like take a second and think a little bit. Something that comes up for me, I did some research earlier in the year about the sort of origins of self-care in Black communities, and how self-care as a sort of radical act began with Black lesbian women like Audre Lorde, who said, in order to create a strong community, we have to take care of ourselves. And as it's become this tag word, it's moved farther away from those origins and become less about, resistance and about political activism, and more about, remaining comfortable in whatever life you have, or something like that. Yeah, Edward, Erica, and if anyone else wants to share, you're welcome as well.
It's hard to follow John's point. I can't follow that. That was really good. That was a really, really good point, John. And I mean, I don't have anything to add. But I definitely echo what you say, what you said. That was really, really strong. And I've definitely seen that a lot in the communities around us, especially, I mean, in Santa Cruz. I think Santa Cruz I've always seen it, and seen like examples of that in Santa Cruz, that I might not have seen living back home. So definitely prevalent here.
Do you feel comfortable sharing any of those examples in Santa Cruz? I mean, I think probably most of us share that community in this call. And we can probably all think of, how you picture Santa Cruz is not actually maybe how like Santa Cruz sees itself, or hopes that is perceived by others to be. If there's anything that you wanted to share, specifically, Erica.
Well, it's not actually, now that I think about it, it's not as related to maybe what John was talking about, but I just remember, or what came up for me in a personal experience was just that Santa Cruz, I realized very quickly that some of the folks who are practitioners here, they just don't have the same understanding and the information of treating patients of color. And definitely came to light for me when I saw a nutritionist from that the health center recommended. And she asked me, what do I eat? And I told her fried rice is a very common thing for me to eat for breakfast. And she thought I literally meant deep fried rice, like fried rice. And that's at that point I realized I'm having a conversation with someone who doesn't understand or doesn't have the information about my cultural ethnicity and my background, and what, how to best treat someone like myself. That isn't a very white centric method of treatment, so I definitely, it hit me then for Santa Cruz. I was like, okay, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to find practitioners and other types of doctors, and not just like your typical MD, but also like nutritionists and dietitians and acupuncturists. They just have a different perspective from the patients they are typically treating in this area, and it's just not the same subset that I am used to. If I were to go back home, I would go straight to Oakland, Chinatown, and I would find myself a nutritionist there or an acupuncturist there who would understand my genetic makeup, and also understand my cultural background, and understand the practices that I engage with. These are practices that make sense for me, and I don't want to kind of like Americanize those practices and shift towards more of that, standard of care that is typical for white people in America. But the standard of care for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in America looks very different, and same for the other BIPOC communities. So that's definitely something that I noticed when I came to Santa Cruz. It's different, definitely different.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That sounds incredibly frustrating, to come to school and not be seen in, you had those resources before, and our community has not provided the standard of care that everyone should be receiving. And that is upsetting to hear, but there's, only room to grow. We are coming up on our hour, and so I have a sort of final little flyer that I want to share with everyone, since we won't have time to talk about it all together. I firstly want to thank Erica, John, and Edward for joining us today and for sharing your personal experiences. I think we had a really great discussion here, and I feel very grateful to all of you attendees and guests, everyone, for joining us in this discussion. I hope that you can all take away something new about the history of these wellness practices, and look to the future. So the link that I've just sent is a flyer that talks about practicing wellness responsibly. There are many tools that you can use in your own community so that you are not, furthering these harmful practices, and instead doing it in a way that is responsible and gives back to the communities that started them. And if there's anything else, feel free to go in the chat. We'll be here for, a few more minutes closing down. But thank you all so much for coming. And I hope that you move forward in a way that is responsible, and that you continue asking questions and always learning. Thanks everyone for joining us.